Life is a tapestry woven with threads of light and shadow, moments of triumph and seasons of silence. We walk through valleys where doors seem bolted shut, where prayers echo into stillness. And we wonder, has heaven turned away? But what if the quiet is not absence, but orchestration? What if every detour, every delay is not a denial, but a divine arrangement shifting into place? The stars, though unseen in daylight, still burn with unwavering fire. The river, though hindered by stone, finds its way to the sea. So it is with the hand of God upon a life. His blessing is not bound by human limitation, nor his purpose silenced by earthly resistance. When he ordains, no force can undo. When he opens, no man can shut. And when God blesses you, my friend, the currents of the universe align, and nothing, no one can stop it. Life is not a string of accidents, nor a series of disconnected events. It is a masterpiece, carefully woven by the hands of the Almighty. Every thread, both the bright and the dark, the smooth and the tangled, has its place in the grand design. But oh, how often we struggle to see it. We stand in the middle of our story, staring at a single frayed strand, and we wonder, what is God doing? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there now. You've prayed, you've waited, and yet doors remain closed. You've stepped forward in faith, but instead of a clear path, you find obstacles at every turn. The world tells you to measure life by immediate results, by what you can see, touch, and control. But my friend, faith is not built on what is visible. Faith is trusting that the unseen hand of God is still at work, weaving a future greater than you could ever imagine. Think about Joseph, a young man with dreams of greatness, visions of leadership, and yet instead of rising to power immediately, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. If you had met him in that prison cell, you might have thought his story was over. But God does not operate on human timetables. The same God who allowed him to be thrown into the pit had also prepared a palace for him. The betrayal, the hardship, the lonely nights, none of it was wasted. Every moment, every tear was a thread in the greater tapestry of his life. And when the time was right, the very circumstances meant to destroy him became the very thing that positioned him for blessing. Maybe today you feel forgotten. Maybe you've looked at your life and thought, has God left me behind? But hear me. God is not in the business of abandonment. He does not start a work in you only to leave it unfinished. The delays, the disappointments, even the detours, they are not a sign that he has forgotten you. They are the evidence that he is shaping something greater, something beyond what you can see right now. Look at the stars. You can't see them when the sun is shining. You don't notice their brilliance when life is bright and easy. But when the night comes, when the sky turns black, there they are, unchanged, unwavering, exactly where they were all along. So it is with the promises of God in your life. Just because you can't see them in this moment doesn't mean they aren't there. And here's the truth. When God blesses you, when his hand is upon your life, nothing and no one can stop it. No delay is permanent. No enemy is greater than his will. No hardship can erase what he has spoken over you. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are in the hands of the one who weaves all things together for good. And when the time comes, when his plan unfolds, it will be unstoppable. When God sets something in motion, no force on earth can undo it. No opposition, no obstacle, no human interference can cancel what he has declared over your life. Yet how often do we let fear convince us otherwise? How often do we mistake resistance for defeat? You see, we expect the path of God's blessing to be smooth, free of trouble and opposition. But all throughout Scripture, we find a different story. We find men and women chosen by God, called, anointed, blessed, and yet the moment they step into that calling, opposition rises. Moses was called to deliver Israel, but Pharaoh hardened his heart. David was anointed as king, but Saul hunted him down. Jesus himself was sent to redeem the world, yet he was met with rejection, suffering, and the cross. But tell me, did Pharaoh's army stop the Red Sea from parting? Did Saul's jealousy prevent David from taking the throne? Did the nails in his hands stop Jesus from rising on the third day? No, because when God speaks a blessing over a life, no power in heaven or earth can revoke it. Maybe today you feel surrounded. Maybe you've faced setback after setback, and you've started to wonder if the promise God gave you is slipping away. But hear me. Opposition is not proof that God's hand has left you. Often it is evidence that you are exactly where He wants you to be. The enemy does not fight against what he is not threatened by. The resistance you feel is not the end of your story. It is the battle before the breakthrough. Do you remember the story of Nehemiah? God put a burden on his heart to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. It was a God-given mission, a holy calling, and yet from the moment he laid the first stone, opposition came. His enemies mocked him, ridiculed him, threatened him. They tried to distract him, to stop the work, but Nehemiah didn't waver. He knew something we must all remember. When God ordains something, it is not man's to cancel. The threats didn't stop him, the opposition didn't shake him, and in the end the wall was rebuilt just as God had planned. I don't know what walls you've been called to build. I don't know what promises God has whispered over your life. But I do know this. No matter who stands against you, no matter how fierce the opposition, if God has blessed it, it will come to pass. Some of you have been holding on to a promise for a long time. You've been believing, praying, waiting, and maybe the enemy has whispered, it's never going to happen. Maybe you've begun to wonder if the door has closed for good. But listen to me, man cannot close a door that God has opened. No enemy, no setback, no circumstance can reverse His will. If He has declared it, it is settled. If He has spoken it, it will stand. So don't give up. Don't let resistance fool you into thinking the blessing isn't real. Stand firm in faith, because what God has begun in you, no one can stop. There are moments in life when God seems silent. You pray, but there's no answer. You seek, but the doors don't open. You wonder if He has forgotten you, if maybe the blessing you once believed in has slipped through your fingers. The silence of God can feel heavy, like a night with no stars, like a song cut off before the final note. But hear me, just because God is silent does not mean He is absent. Just because you can't see Him moving doesn't mean He has stopped working. Think of the seed buried in the soil. It disappears beneath the ground, hidden from sight. Days pass, then weeks, and still nothing seems to happen. But under the surface, beyond what the eye can see, something is stirring. The roots are growing. The life within that seed is awakening. And in the right season, when the time is fulfilled, it breaks through the earth. And what was once invisible becomes undeniable. So it is with the work of God in your life. You may feel buried right now, buried under waiting, buried under uncertainty, but waiting time is not wasted time. God is not ignoring you. He is preparing you. He is strengthening your roots so that when the blessing comes, you will be ready to carry it. Think of Joseph again, sitting in an Egyptian prison year after year. Had God abandoned him? No, that prison cell was not a place of abandonment. It was a place of preparation. God was shaping him, refining him, positioning him for the moment he would step into his destiny. The same brothers who betrayed him, the same chains that bound him, the same years that seemed stolen, none of it was wasted. And when the silence broke, when the waiting was over, Joseph wasn't just free, he was placed in a position of power beyond anything he could have imagined. Maybe you're in that in-between season right now. The promise has been spoken, but the fulfillment hasn't come. And the silence of God makes you question everything. But remember, before the dawn, there is darkness. Before the breakthrough, there is waiting. And often it is in the silence that God does his deepest work. Think of Jesus lying in the tomb. The disciples must have thought it was over. The heavens seemed silent. Hope seemed lost. But on the third day, when no one expected it, the silence was shattered. The stone was rolled away and death itself was defeated. What looked like the end was only the beginning. The silence of God is not the absence of God. It is the space where faith is tested, where character is formed, where trust is built. And when the time is right, when the season is fulfilled, he will speak, and what he has prepared for you will come to pass. So don't fear the silence. Don't mistake the stillness for his absence. He is working, even now. And when he moves, when the waiting ends, nothing and no one will be able to stop what he has set in motion. When God blesses a life, when his hand is upon someone, nothing can stop the flow of his favor. It doesn't matter who tries to stand in the way. It doesn't matter how many obstacles rise up. The blessing of God is like a mighty river. It moves forward, carving its path through whatever stands before it. A river doesn't ask permission to flow. It doesn't stop because of a rock or a mountain. It finds a way, whether by going around, beneath, or through. So it is with the will of God. Once he sets something in motion, no force in heaven or earth can hold it back. We see this time and time again in Scripture. When the children of Israel stood before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them, it looked like the end. There was no visible way forward. But what did God do? He made a way where there was no way. The waters parted, and the people of God walked through on dry ground. And when their enemies tried to follow, the same waters that had made a path for them became a barrier against those who sought to stop them. When God opens a door, it's not just a door. It's an unstoppable passage into what he has promised. Some of you have faced closed doors in your life. You've encountered resistance, setbacks, delays. But hear me, no opposition can stop what God has ordained for you. If one door closes, he will open another. If the enemy tries to block your path, God will make a way where there is no way. His blessing is not dependent on human approval, nor is it threatened by human opposition. Think of David. As a young shepherd, he was chosen by God and anointed to be king. But the moment he stepped into that calling, resistance came. Saul, the very king David would one day replace, sought to destroy him. He was hunted, betrayed, forced to hide in caves. Year after year passed, and it must have seemed as though the promise would never come to pass. But did Saul's jealousy stop the plan of God? Did David's years in the wilderness cancel what God had spoken over him? No, because when God declares a thing, it will come to pass, no matter how long it takes or what stands in the way. And in the end, David did not have to fight for his throne. God established him in his perfect time. Maybe you feel like you're fighting against something too strong for you. Maybe the resistance has been relentless, and you've started to wonder if the promise will ever be fulfilled. But listen, the enemy cannot hold back what God has already set in motion. The river of his blessing is already flowing. It may not take the path you expected. It may not move at the speed you desire, but it is moving. And when it reaches you, nothing will stop it. The will of God is not fragile. It does not depend on circumstances. It does not waver in the face of difficulty. The one who spoke the universe into existence is the same one who holds your future in his hands. And when he declares a blessing over your life, no force, no enemy, no circumstance, no delay can stop what he has ordained. Faith is not tested in the moments when everything is clear. Faith is tested in the waiting, in the in-between, in the space where the promise has been spoken, but the fulfillment has not yet come. It is in that space that doubt whispers, that fear creeps in, that we begin to wonder if we misunderstood God altogether. But faith is not about seeing, it is about trusting. It is about walking forward when the road is hidden, about believing when every circumstance tells you to give up. Abraham knew what it meant to wait. God gave him a promise, a blessing, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. But then the years passed, decades, and still no child. Can you imagine the thoughts that must have crossed his mind? Did I hear God right? Did I misunderstand? Has he changed his mind? But God had not forgotten. The delay was not a denial. The waiting was not a sign that the blessing had been canceled. It was simply a season of preparation, of trust being refined. And in the right time, when it seemed impossible, God fulfilled exactly what he had spoken. Maybe you're in that waiting season right now. Maybe you've been believing for something, a breakthrough, a restoration, a promise that seems delayed beyond reason. And maybe, like Abraham, you've had moments of doubt. Maybe you've even tried to take things into your own hands, to force something to happen. But hear me, what God has promised, he will fulfill. He does not need human intervention to make it come to pass. He does not forget his word, and he does not operate on our timetable. But when the season is right, when the waiting has done its work, his blessing will break through in a way that no one can deny. Think of the farmer. He plants his seed, but he does not see the harvest the next day. He does not dig up the soil to check if anything is happening. He waits. He trusts that in the unseen places, life is growing. He waters, he tends, but he knows that the process is beyond his control, and one day, in the right season, the harvest comes. So it is with the promises of God. You may not see the movement right away. You may wonder if anything is happening at all, but under the surface, beyond what your eyes can perceive, something is shifting. The roots of faith are deepening. The blessing is taking shape. And if you do not give up, if you hold on through the waiting, you will see the fulfillment. Some of you have been praying for a long time. You've been standing in faith, believing, hoping, and the enemy has whispered, it's too late. It's never going to happen. But the enemy is a liar. If God has spoken it, it will come to pass. If he has promised it, no force in this world can prevent it. So don't let the waiting shake your faith. Don't let the delay convince you that the blessing is gone. Keep walking, keep trusting, because when the time is right, when the moment has been ordained, nothing will be able to stop what God has set in motion. When God blesses you, it is not just for you. His blessings flow through you, reaching beyond your life to touch others in ways you may never fully see or understand. But too often, we think of blessings only as something we receive, something to hold on to, something to protect. We forget that the true power of a blessing is not in how tightly we cling to it, but in how freely we let it flow. Look at a river. A river that flows freely brings life wherever it goes. Trees grow along its banks, animals drink from its waters, and entire cities are built because of its provision. But a river that stops flowing becomes stagnant. It becomes lifeless. And so it is with the blessings of God. They were never meant to stop with you. They were meant to move, to flow through you, to bless the lives of those around you. Think of Abraham again. When God called him, he didn't just say, I will bless you. He said, I will bless you and you will be a blessing to many nations. The blessing wasn't just for him. It was meant to flow outward, to change the world beyond his own life. The same is true for you. What God has placed in your hands, whether it is a talent, a resource, a position, or an opportunity, was never meant to be hoarded. It was meant to be shared. Because when you live open-handed, when you allow God's blessing to flow through you, something incredible happens. You don't run dry. You don't lose what you give. Instead, you become a channel of something greater than yourself. Think of the story of the widow in Zarephath. She had just enough flour and oil for one last meal. She was ready to eat it and die. But then the prophet Elijah came and asked for a portion of it. Now, logically, it made no sense. Giving meant losing. But when she obeyed, when she opened her hands and let the little she had flow, the blessing of God was released. Her jar of flour never ran out. Her oil never ran dry. And she didn't just survive, she thrived. Some of you have been holding on tightly to what you have. You're afraid to give, afraid to step out, afraid to trust that there is more. But hear me, God is not a God of scarcity. He is a God of abundance. When He blesses you, He does not do it so you can build walls around yourself. He blesses you so you can become a river, a vessel through which His goodness reaches the world. Maybe your blessing is encouragement. Words that can lift up the weary. Maybe it's time, moments you can give to someone in need. Maybe it's a gift, a resource, an opportunity. Whatever it is, don't keep it to yourself. Let it flow. Because the more you give, the more God will pour into you. The more you release, the more He will supply. When God blesses you, no one can stop it. No enemy can steal it. No opposition can break it. But the greatest tragedy is not when others try to block your blessing. It's when you keep it locked inside yourself. Let it flow. Let it reach beyond you. Because when you do, you will see that His blessings were never meant to be contained. They were meant to